So Dave Chappelle recently endorsed Andrew Yang, and he's with him in Iowa, and he talks about why he did it here to an independent media outlet called Iowa Starting Line. So thanks to them for this video. Let's see what he had to say.
Story of what's happening in Dayton, Ohio. Dayton, Ohio has like a third of the people there living below the poverty line. If you were to take a poll in Dayton and say, what would you rather have, $12,000 a year or health insurance? Everyone's taking the money. Like health insurance is great, but groceries are necessary too. And people in Dayton are having a hard time getting the things they need. I started imagining what a universal basic income would do for my community, and it would save it almost instantly. You know, we recently suffered, mass shootings and all kinds of, everything that happens in the news happens in our backyard in Dayton, the opioid epidemic, all of these things. And I like the idea of giving people choices, putting the money in their hands and giving them the choices. They would consider things that aren't even an option to consider now. And they can do things that aren't an option to do. And that part of his platform I found incredibly exciting. More importantly, you'll hear people say stuff like, make America great again. Well, how about make America feel better again? And I think his platform handles a lot of the emotional content of what being an American is like. Being a homemaker, not being under-recognized, or a worker and being under-recognized. The fear of not being able to pay your bills. This would alleviate a lot of the bad feelings in the country almost immediately. It's something that I think anyone can get behind. It's an important idea, and for some reason I feel like it didn't get the appropriate media coverage. There's a lot of controversies going around this particular election cycle, and I also like Andrew's pragmatism. I don't look at Trump supporters as my enemy at all. I understand why people vote for Trump. I understand people are desperate, and I think that Andrew's right. You run against the reasons that Trump got elected.
So I'm a big Dave Chappelle fan. Of course, Chappelle Show was on the air when I was in college, and I remember we all lost our minds at how funny it was. You couldn't walk down the hallway at my high school without hearing, "I'm Rick James, bitch!" And I just think he's a brilliant dude. But yeah, there's some stuff he said there that I agree with, and other parts I really disagree with. First, let's start with the agreement. To the last part where he says, man, listen, Trump supporters are not my enemy. I can understand why some people voted for Trump. I largely agree with that. I will add the caveat that there is a contingent of TFGs, too far gones, and those are the people like David Duke and Richard Spencer who voted for Trump because he's a bigot. Like those people, yeah, I don't sympathize with them, but I do sympathize with the 2 times Obama voters who then flipped to Trump because Trump said, I'm going to keep your jobs here in the Rust Belt. I sympathize with those people, and if you don't, I think something's wrong with you. And I kind of think that's what Dave is alluding to. Dave is alluding to people did feel desperate, and so they rolled the dice on a game show host, and he has sympathy for those people, and so does Andrew Yang. I would argue so does Tulsi Gabbard, and so does Bernie Sanders, which is why those are the top 3 who chip away and get former Trump supporters. And now it's hilarious that the media tries to use that against them. Like, what they must be doing something wrong by trying to win an election and actively chipping away at their opponent's support. It's like, actually, that would be the opposite of doing something wrong. That would mean you're doing something very, very right. That was just so stupid. But anyway, he said at the beginning there that if you talk to people in Dayton, Ohio, and he's from like rural Ohio, he lives there now, they'd all take $12,000 a year over health insurance. And my response to that is the 500,000 people who go bankrupt every year from medical bills, pretty sure they'd take the health insurance. The 32,000 to 45,000 people who die every year because they don't have access to basic health care, pretty sure they would take the health insurance. I would make my dad take the health insurance because if he had the health insurance, he'd probably be alive today because he's part of that statistic. 32,000 to 45,000 deaths every year from lack of health insurance. So my message to Dave Chappelle on this particular issue is very simple. You don't need to pit those issues against each other. You don't need to say like, hey, it's this or this. Like, what's that movie with the weird mask and it's the horror movie and it's like, you want to play a game? Like, what do you want? Do you want the health insurance or do you want the $12,000 a year? What I would argue is we should do both. Now, this is why I think Andrew Yang, and we'll get to the story in a second, but he signified that, hey, to all my supporters in the caucus, in the Iowa caucus, maybe they'll go to Bernie Sanders. That's what he says. And that's a wink and a nod. That's like, hey, all my supporters, go to Bernie Sanders. Because the way a caucus works, you need the alliances, and I think Andrew Yang realizes where he's at in the polling position, so that's like a wink and a nod type thing. What I'm doing right now is I'm calling on the Bernie Sanders campaign. Sit down with Andrew Yang, talk to him about UBI. If Bernie Sanders agrees to support universal basic income and fight for universal basic income, I think there's a decent chance that Andrew Yang goes, I'm bowing out of this race and endorsing Bernie Sanders. Now, guys, I get it. There's a lot of Yang supporters out there who don't want that. Hey, man, I hear you. That's your candidate, and you're going to ride or die with your candidate, and, you might not even be happy about this, potential thing that I'm laying out here. However, I will say, as of right now, as of today, it's just a fact of reality that the race is down to Biden and Bernie. It would be not just a minor miracle, a major miracle if anybody else got even remotely close to those two. So given that it is really a race between Biden and Bernie, and I think Andrew Yang recognizes this, Tulsi Gabbard recognizes this, they all recognize this now. Now I think they are going to begin to start thinking big picture. And I'm not blaming the voters who are Andrew Yang supporters who are like, hey man, that's my candidate. I don't want to hear any talk about this nonsense. Okay, fair enough. Then turn the video off. What do you want me to tell you? But I think what he realizes and what Tulsi realizes and what many of the other candidates realize is, all right, now I might have to start thinking in a new kind of way. Namely, you might start seeing meetings behind the scenes with Joe Biden and Amy Klobuchar. There was some reporting that Biden was trying to create a back channel to Klobuchar, or Joe Biden and Mayor Pete. Because, listen, if they decided, here's the sad truth, man. If Mayor Pete decided tomorrow, I'm going to drop out and endorse Joe Biden, that would really hurt Bernie. Because Bernie's got to win, in my opinion, at least 3 of the first 4 states to be in a good position. And if Mayor Pete drops out and endorses Biden, that could turn Iowa over to Biden, and the whole race changes, and it swings massively in favor of Joe Biden from there on. So, my point is, I think that Andrew Yang is ideological. To his credit, I think a lot of the other candidates in the race are careerists, and they don't care about the ideology, they care about their careers. Given that I think Yang is ideological, and he does care massively about this issue, the issue of universal basic income, Bernie Sanders should sit down and talk to him and have Andrew Yang make his case for universal basic income. And I think there's a decent chance that if Bernie Sanders endorses universal basic income and fights for it, that Andrew Yang will drop out and endorse Bernie Sanders. And then you want to talk about the race swinging in a positive direction, then good luck, Biden. Because if Mayor Pete and Amy Klobuchar don't drop out and endorse Biden, but Andrew Yang does drop out and endorse Bernie, that's Bernie all day long. Now it's a giant advantage for Bernie moving forward. So that's my message. Because when I say, hey man, hey Dave Chappelle, you don't have to pit those two issues against each other, I can see that many Yang supporters are going to go, but hold on. Bernie supports Medicare for all. Andrew Yang supports universal basic income. Nobody supports both universal basic income and Medicare for all. So those ideas are pitted against each other, and you have to choose between those two things. So you have to pick between those two candidates, Bernie or Andrew Yang. And that's why I'm saying, what if you didn't have to do that? What if Andrew Yang and Bernie Sanders sat down and Bernie endorsed universal basic income, and then Andrew dropped out and endorsed Bernie Sanders? What about that? Then we get the best of both worlds, honestly. We do. So that's my message to Dave Chappelle. I like Dave Chappelle. He's a really smart dude. I think he does know people who would take the $12,000 over the health insurance. But my message to him is you don't have to pit those two things against each other. And also, never let anybody convince you that universal health care is negotiable. That's a total non-negotiable. When every other developed country has it and we don't, and some people are like, what are you going to do? You want this or that? No, not this or that. That's one that we're taking off the table and keeping it there permanently. So that's not open for debate. That's not open for discussion. That one is write that one in stone, son. So that's the other point too, is that's not negotiable. And that's not going to be on the table. That's not going to be in the conversation. That's off the table, and it should be off the table. So I'd also say that to Dave Chappelle. Again, I like Dave Chappelle. This is no shade thrown at him, but we got to start thinking about these things in a different way. And it is possible to both have a living wage and have Medicare for all, have free college, and end the wars. In fact, we have to do all these things. And where I sympathize with the Yang supporters is, I agree with you. I support universal basic income. That's an area of disagreement I have with Bernie Sanders, because Bernie has argued for a jobs guarantee, a federal jobs guarantee, instead of universal basic income. But again, I think maybe if they have a meeting and Bernie endorses UBI, the whole nature of this race could change. So just some food for thought for everybody.